Thank you for joining us at the Science Fiction and Fantasy Con. We are covering LitRPG. Is it fantasy or science fiction? Which is probably the most common question I get asked about LitRPG. So today with us, I have Kevin. I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name because I'm sure McLaughlin. I'm lucky I can pronounce my own name some days. So, and Anthea, did I get it right?
Anthea.
Anthea, getting there. So, they're going to tell us a bit about themselves to start with, so that we know who they are, kind of what they do, and we're going to start with Anthea, right? Get it right?
Close enough. Yeah. So, I'm Anthea Sharp. I write speculative fiction, science fiction, and fantasy, and I started writing my Phalanx series back in 2009. It turns out it's game lit, and I completed that series in 2016. And the basic premise is computer game, high-tech game, near future set is a portal to the realm of fairy. So it breaks some of definitely the LitRPG rules, but it's strongly game lit. And yeah.
And Kevin.
My name's Kevin McLaughlin. I am also a writer of assorted science fiction and fantasy. I've got about, I think, 83 books out there so far. And only less than a dozen of those are LitRPG or game lit. But it's a genre that I've been really interested in watching, and as it begins to kind of pop up and grow.
They have a hugely passionate fan base, I will admit. Mm-hmm. It's very exciting for me as a literature junkie to see how excited people are about this area of or just literature in general. So, but you brought up a good point. What is the difference really between game lit and LitRPG? Because you really started as a precursor to LitRPG.
So game lit, think of game lit as sort of the big umbrella. And LitRPG is kind of one of the subgenres of game lit. So game lit can be something people have arguments about. Tad Williams' Dragonbone Chair, and sort of super early sort of books with game-like settings. Ready Player One is a perfect example of just straight up game lit, lots of important gaming elements. But LitRPG, as a subset of game lit, is where you have on the page stat tables, game alerts, people. Congratulations, you are now level 2. You have gained plus 10 strength, a bag of holding, and 10 points toward your mount. So it's almost like actually playing a game where you're getting those status updates as you go. Mm-hmm. So Kevin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that was just about dead on. Basically just that game lit is the overall thing, and the interesting thing about game lit is it's a lot like the romance genre, in that it's less about the setting. Like fantasy is a setting, science fiction is sort of a setting. Romance is anything that fits into a situation where you have two or more people falling in love and living together happily at the end of the book is a romance, and the setting can be broad. Likewise, game lit has LitRPG inside of it. It would have tabletop RPG fiction inside of it. It would have, I've seen RTS.
Dungeon Core is one.
Dungeon Core, yeah.
Cultivation novels.
Real-time strategy. Cultivation, I would call something wildly different, actually. Cultivation sometimes falls into the game lit, but often isn't. So,
Portal. There's some straight ahead portal fantasy where you go into a world with game-like elements that is kind of falls in the game lit.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely one of the more universal tropes. So leads us to the next question I was going to ask, which is, what are some of the unifying tropes that make game lit and LitRPG a genre?
Kevin.
Unifying trope. I would call the unifying trope the same thing as oh boy, I'm trying to think here. for gamelet as a whole, the only unifying trope I can think of is that the game must matter for the story in some way, shape, or form. If you pull the game out of the story, you don't have a story anymore, then you have a gamelet.
Okay.
If you just have like Queen's Gambit on Netflix.
Yes.
That was gamelet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That was chess gamelet. That was gamelet in the subcategory of board game gamelet or something.
Because I'm 100% with you there. Yep.
If you pull the chess games out of the story, there's no
nothing
story
to talk about.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be what I would say would be the core element of gamelet.
I love that. And I would say game or game-like structure or elements. The idea of progression, of leveling up, even if it's not necessarily called leveling up. So, for example, Delvers LLC by Blaise Corbin is like Portal Fantasy in a world that's controlled by a game mechanic kind of element. And if you remove that structure of how the world is built upon that game mechanic kind of structure, then also the whole thing falls apart.
So I've read a bunch of different, because I decided to do a deep dive because everybody kept asking me because they thought I knew. So I decided to read, and I read like 7 different things that fell into this genre. Like Jay Boyce has she's very light on the game mechanics. It's in there, definitely in her Siphon series, and it's great. But then there's like Dakota Kraut, who I've talked with him, and apparently he uses legit Excel sheets to keep track of everything. And he's like, oh no, I know what that work level is and how many points. And I'm like, oh, you're OCD. And I told him that too. So I'm not talking about it behind his back. But no, it definitely is very interesting. I would say it's one area of fantasy reading that is very hard, in my opinion, for an audiobook. Because they incorporate, because it literally is like right in the middle of the story. You just leveled up. You may be in a combat scene, but here's your stats now. And I'm just like, for me, it was very jarring when I listened to some of the audiobooks of it. But other people loved it. And I'm like, okay, I'm just different.
And there is just the way there's the hardcore fans of LitRPG and gamelit. There's the people who will only consume it in audiobook form, which is very interesting as well.
I'm one of those, though. If I start a series in one format, I have to finish it in that format. So, and it does not matter. It can be ebook, physical book, audiobook. It's got to stay in the same form.
You're not a format shifter. Yeah.
Apparently not. My OCD won't let me do it. But I do like what you also said earlier. I know we're circling back a little bit. So kind of towards the end of the day, whether it's virtual or not. But for me, I've always viewed it as a matter of the game mechanics of where you slot it in the sci-fi or the fantasy department. Because like R.R. Vierdes he has his, and his is, it's not so much a portal. It's actually like the person is put into his consciousness is put into the video game and his body is killed. Like that is the only way he lives now. And but it was a very science mechanic. And then there was one I read by Alaron Kong, and to me it read just as fantasy so much because it was magic portaled him into the Fae, and his version of Fae was a game. So, and from there they went. So for me, it was that like those definitions became very clear. And so maybe it's just because those are the ones I've read. What do you guys think?
I pin it right in science fantasy, which is a genre. So LitRPG is 100% science fantasy, in my opinion. And then from that, or you can then branch out into, I guess we're still under gamelit, which is science fantasy, somewhat. But within that, you can branch out into more science fiction based. Stephen Landry couldn't be here today. He has tech issues, but he writes the Stardivers series, which is very science fiction-y. It's exoplanets, and it's exploring alien landscapes, and it's missions to planets and to asteroids. And so it's very science fiction. My Phalan books are the realm of fairy. It's fairy lore is very fantasy. So
I would define it a little bit differently from that. I think that some of it is science fantasy, some of it is pure fantasy, and some of it is pure science fiction, and it depends on the story. So like I would call The Land, Elrond's works, pure fantasy. There's no element of science fiction in them at all. It's a magic portal to a magic universe where magical things happen in a game-like setting. So the setting is fantasy, and the method of travel is fantasy as well. But then you've got some other stories, my Valhalla Online series, fantasy setting. Almost all the story takes place in the fantasy setting, but the method of travel is science fiction. So is it a science fiction story or is it a fantasy story? That's where you kind of get that little blurring there. And then other stuff like the one you were talking about, the science fiction one, or my Titan Online series, where you have the science fiction method of getting into the story, and it's a science fiction setting as well. And I would call those pure science fiction.
Yeah. Luke Meklos is very much like that too, the Ascend Online. And what I thought was really neat is his actually continued both in and out of the game, his story. And which really read to me as very close to classic sci-fi in a way, like Ready Player One and stuff like that. So,
and there's
actually, go ahead.
There's a lot of stories do that. Do the straddle of kind of a real world storyline and an in-game storyline that are happening concurrently. So it's not necessarily always the trapped in the game and then you're there for the whole book kind of thing. Not at all.
Okay, because I found a lot of them that were, but there's so many. So, and I mean, 7 is not enough to get a good basis of the entire genre by any means. That's like saying, I watched 4 Avengers movies. I know about Avengers. Nah, not really. So I'm aware of my own limitations on that one. But Kevin, did you want to say something?
Well, you picked some good books first off, so good job on that. But what I was going to say was I think that what we're beginning to see in the genre is we're beginning to see more people trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit and draw in additional readers. So something that I'm actively trying to do with the Titan stuff is create a bunch of books which are just as delightful for the regular science fiction reader as they are for the LitRPG reader. And they aren't going to feel quite as alien to the regular science fiction reader as some of the other LitRPG books will. There's no wall of text, stat pages. So it's a way of kind of like gently introducing the general public.
Right, which is why I prefer playing in the game lit world, partially because I started there. I was a GM in a vanilla Warcraft guild, and you don't want to know my /played, but I started thinking about game elements and fairyland elements and how they blended, and so it was before and the stats in the middle of your book was really a thing, and it's not something that I particularly do or am interested in doing. I have enough of a fantasy following that would not find that particularly palatable, I think.
So how much game studying of game mechanics or gaming experience do you guys have that you think is really helpful for doing this kind of a story? Well, Anthea, you said that you started with saying that you did some gaming and you ran a guild.
I was a GM of a raiding guild in early Warcraft, which was fun. And even prior to that, of course, I think anyone who's writing game lit, most people who are writing game lit are gamers and are really drawn to it for a lot of those elements. And if you are not a gamer and you don't really understand how games work, it shows, and people will call you out in the reviews. And there's definitely some bandwagon jumper honors who are like, oh, this LitRPG game lit thing is, maybe I can cash in on that, and they generally get eviscerated in the reviews if they don't really know what they're doing. But that said, I mean, you have to have internal consistency rules for your game world, just as you would with your fiction world. But I think having a love of gaming and more than a passing acquaintance with playing games and playing, particularly if you're going to do something like a MMO the name of your world online, then you should have played some online MMOs and kind of know how that works and the things that go into that.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, if you think about it for a second, the guild was hilarious, right? But how hilarious would that have been if whoever wrote the script for it had never played an MMORPG? I had no idea about the inside jokes and the little cute bits of humor and everything else. I think it's really important. For me, so I was the leader of the longest running anti-RPK guild, I think ever still, but I'm not sure. Somebody might have beat us in the years since. Yeah, I played in pretty much every PvP-based MMORPG released between 1998 and 2008.
Oh, wow. I never got into the online gaming as much personally.
I led a massive multi-game guild that ran everything from Asheron's Call 1 through EVE Online, Shadowbane, all kinds of stuff.
Oh my goodness. You spent a lot of time with your computer.
And I the only reason I really got out of it was because I was starting to get into a little bit of game dev work.
Okay.
I made a small MMORPG, won a reward for it. And it was not a big deal. It was a tiny little thing. I won an award for it and did artwork for a bunch of other games, 3D modeling and texturing.
And let's actually roll back even further to Dungeons and Dragons, right? Which is kind of the archetypical grandfather of all of this in a lot of ways, and of a lot of the online games as well. I wasn't a big D&D player. That was more my brother all through high school. But I watched over his shoulder, and this is dating me a little, but, I was there when Zork came out. And my brother and I played with our graph paper, trying to figure out our way through the dungeon, trying to ask the right questions about, like, climb the tree? Can we do that? So.
Oh, I grew up on old school D&D. So
same.
It is wonderful. I love seeing some of the callbacks to it in some of the games and stuff. And because it is knowing your history a little bit. And I remember when somebody first told me about LitRPG, and I went, "You mean like the TSR cartoon Dungeons and Dragons?" So
yeah, actually.
I went, "Okay, I'm sending you a book. You need to read it." And so but yeah, so I think there's a level of fascination ever since D&D about that lit RPG and game lit really hits on that, you can be your character, because, I've known a few people who changed their names to their campaign character, and I've never been that hardcore dedicated to any of my characters. But I think it's great if they feel that way. Everybody should have something they're passionate about. So do you think that that's part of the appeal, or where do you think some of the large appeal? Because it's a huge industry. I read a article, I think in Forbes, about Dakota Kraut. He earning 1.8 million last year just on Amazon through doing LitRPG. So it's definitely got that fan base.
I think you're getting the people who. One of the wonderful things about the genre is that it's, I think, hitting an untapped reader base, that's the lifeblood of those of us who are creating content and writing fiction. Is that you're pulling in people who aren't necessarily readers to begin with, and you're giving them an experience of, hey, this is kind of like playing my favorite games. This is actually awesome. And then they become voracious consumers of the content. And so I think that's part of really that lifeblood, and that, as you mentioned, the voracious, dedicated fan base, is that it's reaching people who maybe have not felt like they are welcomed into the genre fiction world so much,
Well, some people think we don't talk to anybody, but we'll gladly talk. We're like anybody gladly about what we love and we're passionate about.
Yep.
So Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't have very much to add to that. That was really good. Yeah, I think that I think that it is a matter of a lot of the time reaching people who always wanted to read these adventures, and nobody was they just didn't exist, and now all of a sudden they do. I think that we've seen this sort of thing become really successful a few times in the past, like the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. I mean, come on, people, we still remember that silly show from when we were kids, right?
They re-aired it at one point, and I was walking through the room, and I went, "Wait, did this and this?" And then my youngest brother, who did not remember when it aired originally, looks at me and he goes, "Thanks for spoiling the plot afterwards." And I'm like, I didn't realize it was the exact same cartoon. And then I also looked at him and I'm like, "You're 13." So, yeah.
You should have known about this.
Well, no, just like, you're 13, you can deal with this.
But the idea of jumping into another universe and being that strong, powerful, capable person, or like having easy steps to figure out how to become that strong, capable, powerful person.
I mean, who gets lost in the real world trying to figure out what to do next? Like, what is the formula, right?
Yes. Could we have stat tables telling us?
I know. That's one of those things I miss about the Army, was I knew if I wanted to get promoted, I needed to fill this block, and this block. Now, there were some unsaid things, obviously, because, one should not look at their NCO and go, "You're stupid." Not where they can hear them.
Probably not. No.
No,
I think one of the appeals too for LitRPG, just like you said, is that very clear progression, and it's such a classic hero's journey, right? It's just the character starts, they have a goal, they have to level up, they have to complete quests, they try, they fail, sometimes spectacularly, but they get better until they reach that, and it's such an identifiable journey, and then it's so clean to do it within the framework of LitRPG. I mean, it's just a straight shot down the highway, right?
Now, do you pull, when you're doing some of your world building for these, from established games to help increase kind of the friendliness to the reader that's maybe new to reading, but very familiar with a game?
Yes.
Okay.
But I make sure that it's different enough so that I'm not actually stomping all over the game itself.
Yeah.
So like Titan Online is in an EVE Online lookalike universe. And anybody who's ever played EVE Online is going to instantly recognize a bunch of the stuff that I'm doing there, although everything is slightly different as well. But it's a very similar layout. So anybody who has ever played that game will feel.
Right, and same with my Phalanx series. That's how. Is everyone freezing?
No,
I think Kevin did, maybe.
My microphone messed up for a second. I think I'm back now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
So your analog is EVE Online, and mine is World of Warcraft. And a lot of the, of course, you're not creating the same characters. You're not copying boss fights. You're not using the same terminology, but there's a certain, the party makeup. You've got to have a healer, a tank, some DPS. Don't stand in the fire. Basic little things that anyone who's played, even a little bit of an MMO.
In the fire. I mean, there's some moments. I was warned. I have a little one, and he is a very interesting one. Somebody looked at me and goes, "You're going to say things to him that you never thought you'd have to say." And
don't stand in the fire.
Don't stand in the fire would definitely be one of those. But gaming the same way. I've had moments where I'm like, why did I have to say that? So now, did you guys pick those games because you just love playing them so much? So it's an homage in part to your love of that precise.
For me, oh, absolutely. And it was a way to still kind of be playing in a way as an author. I spent way too much time in WoW, and then once a couple of the further expansions came on, I was like, I've got a family, got a kid, got a husband. Yes, he's like my tank and I'm his pocket healer, but we really should get out of game and like have a little bit of real life. And then writing a gamelit book that really drew on that and the party mechanics was a way of kind of being able to stay in the game, but feel like maybe I wasn't wasting my time quite so much. So
for me, I think I probably pull little bits and pieces from all of the different games I've played, but I leaned heavily into EVE Online for this one because I've only played a couple of space-based. I wanted to write a science fiction story, and I've only played a couple of space-based MMORPGs. There's probably a little bit of Earth and Beyond tossed in there too, because I played that a long time ago.
I remember that game.
I remember that game fondly. I'm really sorry that they canceled it because I thought they had real potential, but oh well.
It's probably because I ended up really liking it. That's what happens. I like it.
It's your fault. Okay.
Also, whoever I vote for never wins. So, I don't let me pick.
So for me, also for the fantasy elements, I definitely knew that I wanted to go down the fantasy track because that's where my alignments are. And as we played over the years, I started to think about, because I grew up reading fairy tales and listening to fairy ballads and just consuming a lot of the traditional fae lore. And I started thinking about how immersive gaming is like being sucked into fairyland. You get some weird time slips where you're like, wait, how much time went by? Are you sure? I think time moves differently in that world. Get that super hyper real saturated kind of experience. Once you eat fairy fruit, like mortal fruit never tastes the same, right? You come out of your raid and you're like, oh wait, the real world is such a letdown. Yeah. So and that virtual space is a very between kind of a place. It's a very liminal place, like you're online but you're not, but that's your character running around, but yeah, this is also you sitting in the chair. So, and those are traditionally the places where fairyland is accessible from, is those between spaces. So all of that sort of conspired in my brain and merged around for a while to become an immersive game that actually opens a portal to fairy, but the gamers don't realize it. They think they're still playing the game, but yet the game rules start to kind of go sideways, as happens when the fae are involved. So
okay, I've really got to read that because that sounds really, really good. I haven't read that yet.
The omnibus is on sale for 99 cents this weekend.
Nice. So yeah, she's been. I had her on another panel, and she was just dropping hints of this book, and I'm like, I need another book. Okay, I need another book.
6 books.
Oh wow,
6 books, awesome,
wonderful. Are you going to do more?
I kind of got to the end of the characters back in 2016. I've done a number of spin-offs, and there's a couple of anthologies of other writers writing in the Feyland universe, which is a lot of fun. And there's a couple of novellas, but I don't know if I'm going to get back into it. I'm kind of pulled in other directions now. So.
Okay. And
sounds
Kevin?
Really cool, though. I definitely want to check that out.
Oh, thanks. It's fun.
So, I can't remember what the question was, and that's a bad sign. I got distracted by the really cool book.
Shiny.
Yeah, they are shiny to me. I have a big box by my feet that I love. My brothers have accused me of viewing them as pets. Yes, because I have a shelf that is marked, you must remove this should anything happen to the house before anything else. Doesn't mean anything. So, but so we were talking about passion, the games,
Tropes. Favorite tropes.
So what are your favorite tropes to use in LitRPG, or to see, even if you haven't used them? Sometimes, as I know, authors will go, "This is my favorite trope. I just haven't found a way to use it yet."
Well, I've just discovered I really like slice of life because I really, really enjoyed the Siphon series so far.
Yes.
And those are I don't usually read the slice of life sort of stuff, but Jay did such a wonderful job bringing that universe to life that I really found it a delightful series. So apparently I like that trope. I didn't know.
I'm a sucker for the trapped in the game story. Sort of online early days, just the oh no, you've woken up and you're trapped in a game and can you get out? That said, I also think it can be poorly done, and it is one of my most frustrating things to read about too. If it's not, so it's one of those like, oh, I am a sucker for it if it's well done. Trapped in a game. And I really dislike OP characters.
Overpowered.
Yeah. Characters like, oh, gee, I got 500% luck stat, and it's where nothing is easy for them. And I think one of the interesting things about LitRPG is that you get some newer writers who are like, hey, this is cool. I love this. I'm going to write this. I want to write this. And that there can be some wish fulfillment going on, and some kind of Mary Sue type characters where the character is just complete wish fulfillment on the author's part. Like, I can do everything right. I have all of these elves and dryads and sprites and leprechauns and whoever hanging off me adoringly. And I think there's definitely a place for that. But that's not my favorite.
Yeah, I think that there's a big crossover section for game lit folks and harem lit folks, which is both confusing and frustrating for some readers, I think, because some readers are like, yes, this is my thing, and I really want to read harem books nonstop. But other people are like, can you please tell me which ones are not this? Because they don't want to read that stuff. So I think that that's something that as we go along, people are just going to get better at pointing it out with their covers and their blurbs and what have you, whether this is or is not a certain thing. It's like, again, going back to romance again, it's romance authors are really pretty good at describing with their cover and their blurb the heat level of their various books. And I think we're going to see the same sort of thing happen with LitRPG as far as that goes.
Yeah, as the genre kind of matures.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
exactly.
It's not even a decade old, I don't think.
No, not even.
So I know we've had the Dragon Awards have had a couple LitRPGs make the finalist list, which was neat. So
2016 would be, I think, where I would figure it would really have kicked off in a large way.
The Russians were in there around the 2014 mark or so, writing stat-heavy books. They were kind of the first, kind of into the gate.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some stat stuff for actual games like World of Warcraft books and stuff like that. That had some. No, most of them didn't even have.
No,
I saw
they were mostly
books in the early 2000s that had some sort of statty stuff in it, but not a lot of it. And they certainly didn't.
Most of it's very indie heavy, which I think because it definitely doesn't fit that niche that TradPub likes.
Mm-hmm.
So. And they've tried, actually. I think there's been a few essays out there into Marie Lu, who's a big YA author, wrote duology. The first one's called Warcraft. Obviously trying to kind of like, and I don't think it was like done in a mercenary way, but it was like hey, this is a hungry market out there. Can we grab some of it? But TradPub just doesn't have the skills to be able to do
that those books flopped, and Tide isn't willing to put their stuff into Kindle Unlimited, and virtually all LitRPG readers are in Kindle Unlimited. So if you're not there, you're missing most of the market.
I get a number of them through Barnes and Noble, but they're still like they're indie, and which is fine. I have no compunctions about buying an indie book. I just buy a book if it's good. I have been known to buy a book just because I was in a panel room and I'm like, the author is so cool. Let me go buy this book.
I do want to say, though, one of the very cool things that's happening as an outgrowth of the immense population of LitRPG, and you mentioned Dakota Kraut, James Hunter, there's wonderful things that are happening with authors starting their own imprints and publishing houses concentrating on the LitRPG genre. So there's this really wonderful ecosystem of smaller publishers coming up for those authors who don't have the skills or the ability to get their work to market in an appropriate way. So
and I know
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Aethon is doing that now too. They have been doing science fiction fantasy for a little bit, but they're now picking up LitRPG and LMBPN as well. My release thing is doing LitRPG as well.
Yeah, Aethon produced the audiobooks of Phelan, and I couldn't be happier. They did a great job. So.
Nice.
Yeah, the other thing is also the LitRPG genre is like many indie authors genres. The books come out pretty intensely. Like I have a friend who runs Badash Publishing, and she is an indie small press, and she goes, I'm like, I beta read for her, and I'm going, where are we on releasing these things so I know what not to say? Because I'm reading the books ahead of time, but she had like the first 3 books done before she even started publishing book 1, so she gave herself some breathing room. So I'm always so surprised at how fast indie authors and the LitRPG, and that may be part of why it grew so quickly, though, too.
That's indies in general, pretty much. I mean, across science fiction,
you guys are speed
romance, etc. Indies, it's rare to see a full-time indie who's not producing at least 400,000 or 500,000 words a year.
That sounds so huge.
And I know it does. But if you think about it for a second, 100 years ago, writing 1 million words a year was the normal year for any full-time author. That was normal.
You're talking to the person who had panic attacks about write a 750-word essay, okay? Like, full, I'm not even kidding. Like, full legit, my mom was going, go take a shower and calm the hell down. Panic attacks.
Well, I'm just sorry. I shouldn't have laughed then. Panic attacks are nothing to think about. But
no. It's okay. And some of it, I was also at times very prone to drama as a teenager. So
right.
As an adult, I can say that now. Like, if you see me nervous, I'm sitting there and I'm going, because I'll get nervous before a con, and I'm like, it's okay. None of them are armed. None of them have grenades. This isn't my life. I'm okay.
Right.
And then I'm good.
Well, for a full-time writer, though, the math is pretty simple. A slow writer producing just 1,000 words an hour, writing for 20 hours a week, which is half of a full-time, a full-time worker's hours. So the other half, I'm figuring you're doing all the other stuff. Yeah. Working 50 weeks a year produces 1 million words. And I write at more than twice that speed, and I'm not unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I write over 2,000 words on an average hour, and I'm not weird. I'm not unusual for doing that. I am on the faster end, but I'm not weird. I'm not.
And even if you're a slow writer, even if you're doing 1,000 words a day, you have 365,000 words at the end of the year.
There you go.
So.
Yeah, that still boggles my mind, but that's okay. That's why I'm always incredibly impressed by authors who are doing it. Well,
the indies are the pulp authors of yesteryear, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
absolutely.
In the saddle, getting the words out, getting the stories out. There's a whole other conversation about speed versus quality, which I think is a false dichotomy. But and I think a lot of people who write quickly would agree with that. That you're not necessarily sacrificing quality if you're going fast, but.
My take on the subject is pretty simple, actually. It works exactly the same as a violin. The more hours you spend doing it, the better you get.
Yeah. I've talked with like John Ringo, who's a traditionally published author, but he binge writes. He will sit down and he will write literally for 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And but his quality, I've talked with his editor, and his editor's like, he turns in really clean manuscripts, surprisingly, because he did 1 book in like 4 days. And I'm like, yeah, no, my brain hurts with that, but everybody works in a different way. Mm-hmm. So,
and indies have the luxury, quite frankly, of being able to make this a full-time job because we can make it pay for ourselves, which unless you're very fortunate, it's much harder to do out of a traditional publishing.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest difference, honestly, is indies know we're going to be able to publish everything we write.
Yeah.
And if I was going to try and write 12 books a year and then submit them all to traditional publishers and hope that I was going to somehow get paid for at least some of them, well, that's kind of awful, honestly, from my perspective.
It sounds very
12 books a year and know that I'm going to make money from every single one of them.
Right.
And they're all going to find readers.
Be the power is in our hands.
Very scary to me. So. But so LitRPG, well, circling back to our topic because we only have a few more minutes. 1 second, sorry, I had something buzzing me telling me you have to wrap up soon eventually. So I set timers so I know, because otherwise we can go down rabbit holes and have so much fun, and we never get we never turn over the room, so to speak, I guess in this case. So, where can we what inspired you to start writing a lit RPG, Kevin? We've heard Anthea's. I'm going to have to write this down. The pronunciation.
It's really late in the day. I think it's okay at this point.
So what inspired you to get into lit RPG? So,
well, I've been playing D&D since I was 7 years old, and then I played MMORPGs for the better part of a decade, and then I made art and wrote some fiction and stuff for MMORPGs for a couple more years after that. And so when I heard this podcast back in 2016 saying LitRPG is so cool, there was a podcast that got everybody on board. All of a sudden, the whole thing exploded in early 2017. But I was one of the people who was like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome!" And then I went and started reading some of the books, and I was like, "Okay, these are okay." But these are obviously novice writers. They will get better, but they're novice writers. I'll bet you I can do this pretty easily. But I read some more of them first to get a really good feel for what the genre looks like, and then I start writing.
So, what books would you both recommend for somebody who is getting into lit RPG? Obviously your books, but is there anything else you'd recommend for trying for the newbie?
Definitely Titan Online. I hear that's a pretty good series. And I have a couple that I really recommend. One is Threadbare by Andrew Sepel, which is a golem-like teddy bear leveling up, and it's just so darn cute. It's not necessarily like middle grade appropriate, but it's a pretty cool take on the genre. I also very big right now is Shirtaloon, He Who Fights with Monsters, which is just another thing that I love that I cannot put in my books very well, but is laugh out loud, goofy humor. Like, potent hamster attacks your face, does 12 damage. That's me on the floor, man.
Adding to that list, let's see. I really, really loved Jay Boyce's Siphon series. It's a trilogy so far, but there's more coming. It's
in arm's reach.
Those are so good. And pretty much anything by Dakota Kraut and James Hunter, you can't go wrong with. And I would honestly, I know there's a lot of mixed reviews about whether or not it's actually good books or whether or not people like them and what have you, but I would check into The Land simply because it is so popular and so heavily read that it's sort of like reading The Lord of the Rings. It helps you understand everything else because so many other things were written after it based on it.
But it continues as it begins, let us just say.
Yes.
So
at least check out the first book or two because it's worth getting a feel for how the writing flows.
Yeah, I read the first book on it. I read the first book of a lot of different ones. Axe Druid was one that I found was fun, and I liked it because it was a group of vets. So and I'm biased because I'm a vet, so it's kind of fun sometimes getting that because there's a certain way vets talk. It's not always good, but it is recognizable.
It really is.
But so we're coming to an end, and as we wrap up, I would love for each of you to say where people can find your books, particularly re-mention the title of your lit RPG or game lit book, where they can find that, where they can find you, and then maybe if you have another panel, what that panel would be.
All right. AntheaSharp.com, and my books are, unlike the majority of lit RPG books, I am on all the retailers with my Phalan series, and currently Phalan, the complete series, omnibus of 6 novels, 4 novellas, and a couple of short stories is just 99 cents at all ebook retailers. And you can whisper sync the 54-hour audiobook along with that for a mere $7.49. So that's me.
Very cool. For my almost all of my books, LitRPG or otherwise, are in Kindle Unlimited. So I'm on Amazon almost exclusively. The Valhalla Online series is my LitRPG stuff. And I also have the Titan Online series, which is not released yet. You can only get it on Patreon. So you can search for Kevin McLaughlin on Patreon, and you can find me on there. And check out the early look at Titan Online. That's also going to go up on Vela when it goes live.
Vela, yes, and that's another place to keep an eye on what's going on with LitRPG, because I know there's a number of
big for LitRPG down the road.
Yeah, there's a lot of authors.
New serial program. I think that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
That is, I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. Vela, as a reader and as somebody who gets asked to organize things on literature, I'm very curious. Now, do either of you have any more panels at CIFCon?
I've got one tomorrow. It is 3 p.m. Eastern for historical inspirations for science fiction and fantasy.
I'm going to be following Kevin over there, skulking behind him in my Assassin's Creed cloak. And I will also be on that panel talking from my historical romance writer hat about the Victorian era. And then I have a coffee clatch a couple hours after that, I think. So.
Nice.
I did one of those this morning. It was fun. It was interesting. We talked a lot about Dragon Con, actually. Amy was like, so tell me the secrets. So, but then I have a panel tomorrow at 1 Eastern, so 9 a.m. West Coast time, for magical cultures. And so I hope all of you who are watching at home enjoy it. Go check out these wonderful books and enjoy some of our other great panels at CIFCon.
Hey, if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors, our community at KSM might just be what you're looking for
some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.